Okay. Hello out there, Internet. Welcome back to another episode of FSUFO, or as I prefer, Forbidden Science. And this is the podcast that looks at all things UFO. And we sometimes stray this way, that, up and below into other aspects of the paranormal where need be. I'm flying solo today. I have no co-host. Apparently, Michael McDonald is off flying somewhere, as he tends to do with his little airplane. Sounds like a lot of fun to me. And I've heard rumors that Justin Brown could be at some kind of family picnic event in some other province somewhere. I don't know. So I'm going to have to hold down the fort on my own. But it should be easy today because we're going to have lots to talk about. I have a very special guest today. And our guest today is Ryan Stacey, and he's been around for a while. And he's done so much here. In fact, you're going to see me look down occasionally at some cheat notes here because I don't want to misrepresent or leave anything out here. Ryan is a very busy guy. And as we're going to see, here's just some of the things he's done here before we bring him on. He's known as a private investigator. He owns his own company. He's a citizen journalist, an active disclosure ufologist. He's also a paranormal psychogenic investigator, and he's creator, and we'll be getting into that. And we're going to get a few clarifications on some of these terms of the ultra spectrum classification system. He's founder of TESA, the Experiencer Support Association. I'm going to have plenty of questions about that. And he's also the CEO of the Blacklight Investigative and Surveillance Services Group. He identifies as now this is a term you don't hear too often, and a phenomenologist. Now I'm going to have to practice saying that, even I've said it so little. But I think that one, we could guess at it, but we'll also get his definition down the road. So without any further ado, if we can get our magic eye at the controls here to bring Ryan in. Hello, Ryan.
Hello, Chris. Nice to see you again.
Yes, it's been great. It's been a few years. I remember meeting in Toronto there at, what was that, 2018? Seems a lifetime ago now. With the world of COVID and all that,
And that was the Alien Cosmic Expo.
Yeah, that was such a crazy busy year for me before everything got too unbusy for some time, as we know. So you've been so many things. I know for a long time you were director of investigations, as well as in charge of training and that for MUFON of Canada. That must have kept you busy. And
also the National Chief Investigator for Canada as well.
Yeah, that can keep you busier than we think, because the MUFON numbers I know in Canada, north of the border there, have never been that great. And, so some people there sit back and just read the journal they used to have, I know, and some days some people there, they're run off their feet trying to look into things that are referred to them. Anyway, we're here not to talk about ancient history and your involvement with MUFON and that, not that it's that long ago, like say you are a young fella. But what you're doing right now, because I think, having looked at your website and just a few of the brief notes and things you sent me, sort of thing, I find it very interesting. And there's a theme here, but I think if it's okay, and this is just going to give a real overview of that and why people should go look for themselves, hopefully in our audience, those who might feel the need and those who might just have a good honest interest will go look at your site and spread the word of it, hopefully. But for those who are less interested or not quite sure what we're talking about, maybe I'll get you to clarify a few definitions here. And the first one that jumps off the page that really grabbed me was the ultra spectrum classification system, which I understand is your creation.
Correct.
Yeah. So what would that entail? What would lie on this spectrum, Ryan?
So, to give the background, so I've spoken to Paul Hynek before, working on this classification system,
and he would be the son of Alan?
The son of Alan Hynek. Yes, correct.
Yes.
I just kind of wanted to get an understanding on how the family might feel if I were to suggest an alternative way of looking at the phenomenon that included Valet's work and John Keel's work with the super spectrum. So the term ultra spectrum is, up from super is ultra. So the kind of the next level, that's where that name came from. So the ultra spectrum classification system to include an homage to Keel, Vallée, and Hynek. With that in mind, in the classification system, there is only one row that is the old Hynek Vallée classification that's still used. So the close encounter, but we call it close experience, simply because the word encounter has a negative connotation towards it. So an experience could be positive or negative to allow it more data to come forward. So I wanted to change the word and the language on that. But the classification system itself is based on removing these labels, recategorizing how subjects view the phenomenon, and allowing the possibility of all theories to coexist. So what I mean is, let's take an orb for an example. Depending on how you were raised and what you grew up watching and studying, you might call that a UFO. Some might call it paranormal. Now, some might call it a UAP. So these are different labels and archetypes that are used to describe the same thing. And when I talk to a UFO community, starting with UFOs and learning into the paranormal and all these other things, I understand all far too well that the factions do not get along with each other because of many different things. So what I was trying to do is create a universal way to communicate, by being the middle person to communicate to these audiences and these groups that we may be talking about the same thing. So to use the classification system, so I call it the first category. You have it up, perfect. Sensory display. So with sensory display as being the root event category, that allows taken reports that include audio, so auditory, and mental phenomena, because we're not quite sure where these events are happening. Sometimes people are seeing them in downloads, cognitive consciousness, all these other things. Sometimes witnesses are able to take pictures of them, right? And if there are some theories out there that they may be transmedium or interdimensional objects, and which would make sense why some people can capture it in one dimension and other people in the paranormal spectrum or psychology spectrum is able to see it in their mind. So calling it a sensory display kind of regulates that, whether it, what medium the experiencer had, because I'm seeing a variance of methods in which they're able to capture or see these things, but they're describing the same thing, or they look the same or similar, right? So then the two tags, aerial activity or paranormal activity. So aerial activity specifically for the orb we would use that classification because it's in the sky, it's in the air, and it's activity. So, and then the other subclass would be a machine or a light. So for an orb, I would call that a light. So I would say event category would be sensory display, aerial activity, light. And what that means, it could be a UFO, it could be a paranormal orb, it could be a UAP, but all of us would have to agree, or should agree, that some sense was used to observe, and it's in the air, and it closely resembles a light. And the reason for that is so that when we have a group in these categories that have these labels removed, it'll be easier for us to take that batch and try to weed some of these things out. Because if we label it from the get-go, we're kind of predestined what we want the answer to be. And as a private investigator, when I'm collecting facts and evidence and all these other things, I have to be unbiased. I have to be in the middle, and I have to look at the facts and try to figure out, what is it that I'm comparing this to. Another example, let me see here, in the UFO phenomenon, we call it visitation. So instead of abduction, because abduction has that negative term as well. So visitation allows for a positive experience to be reported as well, not just negative. Mental presence, physical presence, or hybrid. So a hybrid would be They are physically in front of you, but they're communicating to you telepathically. We're measuring, whether it was invited or uninvited, trying to determine whether they're using protocols like the CE5 movement or meditation or maybe even a float tank, some sort of medium or seance, if you will, to make contact intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's, of course, there's experiences that happen unintentionally, depending on that. So the hybrid is for when there's events that um, have a combination. You got a being observed, you have a craft, and you have psychic phenomenon. So when you get a report, and this comes from with MUFON, it was all kind of grouped together in a batch, and you had to separate that, and you needed to close it and put these classifications in place with the Hynek Vallée scale, and then there was just this other box. So to eliminate, to put it in a box, that's where the kind of hybrid is. But I want to separate that, because when an experiencer reports, say and what we call a visitation, and there's a craft involved, and there's a psychic phenomenon, we need to measure all of those things separately. So we would do a report on the aerial activity, compare that to other aerial activity, take a report on the being observed, and compare that to other beings that were observed, and then look at the psychic phenomenon and look at how that relates, and then connect it together through the experiencer. So through a lot of the things that I'm trying to understand too is why some people can see it and why other people can't or haven't.
Ah, I like that.
And so myself, I've never seen a UFO, but I've had some psychogenic, activity that is questionable.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I started to learn about consciousness and the connection to all this other stuff, this evidence scale, if you will, is to give more backbone to the paranormal side, so that way the UFO community can comprehend and
Mm-hmm.
show that that data can be used to support the existence of UFO.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know where they come from. It's still possible that it's man-made. That's still a possibility. Some believe it's extraterrestrials.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So by having it regulated, we're able to get a true reading of what's being observed. Now, that helps with collaboration. So if you're using the Hynek classification scale with MUFON, and you want to submit a report, I can repackage that depending on what classifications that you use. We also include a mental experience in the range, because there's close experience, extreme close experience, there's remote experience, and then mental experience. So what I'm finding, when I collect the evidence, and so the next part of that is actually an evidence scale. So I make levels of what the best evidence would be, and that's based on basically a court preparation of what evidence would be admissible, if we were to build a case to take this to a legal system. So what was I going to go with that? Lost my train of thought. I was on a roll there.
But it happens. Well, while you're gaining it, can I ask you one little question? I
Yeah.
really like this, how you're tearing apart and categorizing and making sure the data gets where it's useful and to be used. But what happens when you're dealing with these cases, Ryan? I don't know if you've encountered it. I've certainly encountered it here on the East Coast, where um, you look at cases that it may be just in the sensorium. There may or may not be a real physical object there, but you have a group of people, it's the same time, it's the same location, and they're perceiving it totally differently.
Yeah, so with the experiencers that have a different variance of beliefs, I have to believe them, and it's the way that it's labeled. And what I'm trying to do is to understand that they have been taught a certain way, they've read certain things that are different, um, they understand a different way, and try to figure out how it's all connected in their mind, and at the same time, um, labeling it or regulating it in such a way that no matter what the belief is, no matter what the faith is, no matter what the opinion is, there are some fact to it that we can agree upon. So when I label it, cut it away, without the archetypes. If they want to call it something, then there's no judgment. That's no different than someone calling their God Jesus, someone calling their God Allah. What's common between these people is they both believe in a higher power, and a higher power may be the source of this phenomenon, maybe. So that gives me an idea and a direction and a focus on where to take my investigation when I'm looking at this information. So I also specialize in locating people and locating information. So I need to understand what category these boxes fit in. And with this phenomenon, it's another reason why I identify myself as a phenomenologist, is because I study the people and how it affects the phenomenon affects them. So what I'm looking for is, anxiety, stress, and all these other things. People fighting with each other. Why do they fight? What answers is it they're trying to get? What do they comprehend? When you get a fact, and all these other things. So I kind of spent a lot of time learning why people are the way that they are, and what I'm sensing in terms of with frustration, is that no one, or not many people, are getting a good sample of data to study. And whether you can defend the government or not, or be against the government, these are all valid humanistic characteristics that we can apply to the government to say, you lied about this one thing, so you're lying about all this, and we know this, but it's still possible that they're telling the truth. So so my role is to kind of be in that middle, to kind of balance both sides, to be like, yeah, I hear you, but the facts say this. And just because you think that's opinionated, hearsay, and all these other evidence, to kind of meet in the middle. Now, the terms of evidence goes, a lot of people are looking for that nuts and bolts fact, the government confession, and a piece of video, right? And even as being confirmation. And a lot of journalists, what I've learned is journalists is looking for that clickbait. Researchers are looking for information that can be measured, so they can do graphs and scales and write white papers and things like that, and science, which I understand. So regulating this information should hopefully help academics be able to study the data more efficiently, because the evidence is better. So I'm building a case, and to show that different types of evidence can be used to support the whole phenomenon. And you have to realize, and at the same time understanding, that a journalist isn't going to write a article that has a drawing on it or has a witness testimony, because the editor will not publish that, because it's not clickbait. So they need to have a video. So as a journalist reporting on things like that, they're kind of skewed in which they can report on. A researcher, again, needs something they can physically measure, so they do surveys, they do questionnaires and things like that, and they take the data and they quantify it, and I do that again at the end of the year as well, and then they can able to extrapolate that and put their opinions out there. But it's still it's based on experience or testimony from all over the place. Now, with me, when I work with the experiencers and work with different layers of evidence, I'm able to build a stronger case, so I have more evidence until we get that smoking gun. Because if we just have a video, and that video is strong, the best piece of evidence as far as evidence would go, because it's demonstrative, it's still just one video, and it's missing information. So with analogical evidence, which is drawings, right? A lot of people, just because you didn't take a photograph, they can still draw it. And if they draw it, I apply what's my recreation services. So I also have experience in recreating crime scenes and things like that, to try to understand what had happened and all these other things. By recreating the event, adding color, adding all these other significance with the experiencer, we have a visual, which is the visual evidence database, which I'm sure we'll get into as well. So that way it can show a quick comparison of what these images look like. Now, the analogical evidence and the experiencer testimony is weak on the scale of evidence. But then when you look at these individuals separately and you see that they're drawing the same thing, that analogical evidence becomes a little bit stronger, especially when you take into account that one person called it an orb, one person called it a ghost, another person called it a UFO. Once those labels are removed and you're just looking at these images, we have a better understanding that we're interpreting the same thing differently. So then we can look at the physical characteristics and trust a little bit more that these experiencers are seeing something. And whether it's mentally or physically and they're unable to capture, we don't know. But, some experiencers see it in their mind. Some people don't see it in their mind or think they don't see it in the mind, but they're drawing the same thing. Then all of a sudden, I get a declassified document from the Canadian government that describes, an orange, an orange orb, for an example. So this is actual data that I have, and so that declassified document is better evidence in the sense that it came from the government. It's more official, if you will, but they don't have images. But if you look at the way it's described and you imagine that, and you look at the images that the witnesses have drawn, it looks similar. So it's now those analogical pieces of evidence, those drawings are now compounded and stronger and reinforce this document. But we still need a photo. And then all of a sudden I get a photo from somebody else, an actual photo that looks like all these things that they're talking about. And then all of this string and line builds the case to prove that this phenomenon exists. And
Yeah,
then with
yeah, Ryan. One of the things I find interesting is that when you talk about like these Canadian government documents that come from, probably Library and Archives Canada or from the former Directorate of History at DND. One of the neat things I find is that something else that has a determination on their worth is what I call the margin notes. And
Okay.
sometimes the margin notes in these documents from the agency will tell you more about what they really thought. I'll give you one real quick example. There was a sighting back in the 70s of a certain type of UFO that was seen quite commonly here in Nova Scotia. And some witness called in about, this 3-section craft flew low over his craft when he was just outside the town of Windsor, Nova Scotia on the highway, and how he kept moving. But in the margin notes of that RCMP report, one of the staffers writes that this is what some of our members have been seeing, sort of thing. Half a dozen guys this month have called in reporting the same thing in the same location around 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
So again, you have that insight into, in a sense, I don't like the term the government. It's so broad, and one part may not know what the other does know, or may have a different policy of release. But the thing is, you do see that somebody who's in charge of an agency, be it RCMP, government, Air
Mm-hmm.
Force, whatever, has expressed their opinion that they know what they're talking about. In fact, their own members have witnessed it. So that document I would rate as being, quite value. A higher thing of
Yeah, because
evidence.
there's more witnesses. It adds witness to the
That's
testimony.
right. But it also shows that, they accept that as evidence too, that it
Mm-hmm.
was, deemed legit to the agency and their own members had dealt with it. Anyway, yeah, I'm sorry to
And
jump on that, but
no, that's
yeah,
okay. But it
yeah,
still does. It's as credible as that is, and I've seen a lot of these documents this way too. It doesn't support. It
yeah,
doesn't identify the object either. It's still
no,
unidentified,
no.
but it proves that the phenomenon exists. It proves that they've been looking into it.
Hmm.
So that's where we kind of get into, I guess, the way that I'm handling the declassified documents as well.
Hmm.
So I have on our website, I have 3 there as a sample to show what I'm trying to do to measure things. So it's essentially my virtual crazy board that I'm sharing with the world, and
Hmm.
a lot of people don't realize, as you mentioned, the margin notes is one thing, but these abbreviations and things like that. There's more information on these redacted documents.
Yeah,
Um, if you were to spend time, and again, what I've observed is that, and with the frustration, because I'm trying to figure out why we haven't solved this yet,
yeah,
and I think it's because no one's put the pieces together, and that's what I'm good at, and that's what I built this system to figure out. Like, if I was going to do this, I'm going to do this for the next 50 years. How would I do it? How would it make sense? How would I communicate this to all
mm,
these different audiences? And how would it matter? And that's why I have to dial it all back down to facts, because I understand that these people are siloed in the way that they believe. And the reason why we're not working together is because we're in different tiers. And we understand that is because you have no proof. But I do strongly believe that the academics would be more happier if I was able to collect better data for them, if I was able to teach people how to properly investigate and collect other types of evidence that would support it, work with them, because the experiencers are the witnesses. And yeah, they took a photo, but what if they took a crap photo? You need to teach them how to take photos better, so that way the next time the phenomenon happens, they get a better photo. And by working with these people and doing all this stuff, I get better evidence. I get the best evidence. But a lot of people don't have time to do that because they have deadlines. They want to, their motives is money. They want to get their next book out. They have papers that they have to fill by the deadlines to get them in for review. Like there's all these things. So we do the best that we can. But we're still constricted with the rules of life. So with the declassified documents and the visual evidence database and the event timeline, okay, so perfect, you have that there. So not just using the classification system as a way to classify your own cases, I'm also showing you using those categories on the map. So this map, like many others who have done maps, separates the phenomenon. So you can look at them all together, or you can silo and look at whatever field you're particularly interested in. I am focused on Canada because I don't think Canada gets enough credit in this UFO race. I know there's a lot of us like yourself, Chris, that's been doing this for many years, and there's a couple out in the East Coast there. So if you So the green one is a being observed, and the yellow are aerial activities. So, I mean, this is a drawing, but I mean, this is Men in Black. That's the archetype as well. So if you click on that, it will actually bring you. There should be, if you scroll down, you should be able to see a Learn More. There might be more information on that if you have. Yeah, perfect. Click that Learn More. So what I'm also doing with these cases is trying to educate people quickly and rapidly, because people don't have time to read all these things. You just want to find something that's going to create a buzz and get it out there so people click on it and do it, right? So this video here is a recreation video that walks the experiencers through the event. And the purpose of that is hoping that another experiencer might see the same thing and make a report. It's kind of like we call it TESA's Most Wanted in a sense, right? Whenever a crime happens, Crime Stoppers is what we use. I was a volunteer for Crime Stoppers for many years. We would put it to the public, and once the public saw an image, then the public would solve it. So it's kind of taking that anomaly. And these are the original drawings from this particular experiencer. We watermark them because not because we're afraid of them going anywhere, is we know that a lot of people steal the work and take credit for it. So we're trying to get credit for the work that we're doing. This is a regression transcript too, but if you scroll all the way down to the bottom, that's right here. So this data here is part of a survey that I'm working on. One is the Ultra Spectrum Paranormal Report, and then I have the Canadian Current Event Survey. But this is the data that some of the data that I get retrieved from the reports when they come in. So I put them out here. So that way investigators like yourself or researchers like yourself could look at it, and it could assist you in your research. Mm-hmm. So instead of me doing it privately, right, I'm also releasing some of it publicly, but you wouldn't know how to use it unless I taught you how to use it. And this also helps me when I'm in the field. So if I were to travel somewhere and I'd be like, hey, I'm talking to someone, let's look at your area. Like what you just did is when you opened it up, you looked in the East Coast to see what was in your area. People naturally do that. Also having these categories set up here, if you click beings observed on the bottom category there, that will take you to a page that shows every single case that's been categorized like this. So what this helps me and others is quickly scan all of the beings that were observed, and then I'll be able to click on the ones that look similar, so that way I can study them in more detail. So in this particular sample, you will see a variance of beings, but there are cloaked beings that look different, and they have different characteristics. And this is where that cloak becomes a significant piece of evidence, because some people don't remember the face. They just remember the cloak. and some people remember, get finer details, and then you can get these experiencers together to remember and all these other things, and you start to get more evidence, and you build this case, and then you can figure it out. And so it kind of rules out a lot of, like, they're lying, there's something going on. What it may or may not be is debatable. We need science to explain that, but we need one to capture it. But what I'm also doing is being able to focus on where to look. So with the declassified documents too, on top of that, layered, um, I'm taking the information, I'm transcribing the reports, so that way when you go to the website and you click search, any document that mentions that will pop up. I'm also adding persons of interest or objects of interest. So every time a report comes in that I upload to the system, it will tell me the person's, place, thing, organizations, all that stuff, and whose name is associated with these groups, which documents are associated with these people, so that I can start to see a pattern of who's involved with this particular movement. And why that is important is because the redaction phase, when I studied how that process works, it's up to the persons mentioned in the document. So yes, we're allowed to request a freedom of information request, but in order to decide what's being redacted, the parties involved give consent on whether or not certain information they like to be released. So depending on who that is, who says no, and whatever, that will determine what we get out. But the thing is that process is followed for each set of documents. And every time I make a request, and depending on the body of those documents, which is what you're focusing on, that will determine a certain a different level and variance of their mood that day. So if it's not important to them that day, they might be lax and lazy and not redact certain things. On something that's critical, they would redact everything because they don't want that stuff to get released. But if I do it this way in this system, eventually I get pieces of information from these individuals from all of these documents, and I start to understand the full picture, because they're human too, which is why I study the phenomenon, the people, and how it affects them. And then once I connect all the pieces together, you see them on the visual evidence database, so you see where they happen. So these declassified, the only three I have on there right now is the meeting minutes
Yeah.
before they made Project Magnet, so Project Theta at the time.
Yeah.
And I am going to be working through a ton of documents. I'm just testing the system out to
Yeah.
see how it works.
Oh, it's
Um,
early days for you. One of the things, I find is that
yeah.
in this country, I've looked at a lot of documents. You don't see a lot of black ink or redactions here. In some of the newer ones you do, since the Privacy Act, you don't see a lot. Here, what happens if something's really hot, they
Hmm.
really don't want you to have, it's just unavailable, or that more important category yet, Ryan, which is
Hmm.
we don't know what you're talking about. Because you
Exactly.
see, if you could ask for something and if you have a file number, or you have strong evidence that they should have it.
Hmm.
Um, if you don't know what you're talking about, if you can't locate it, then we can't ask for a review.
And there's consequences to them not
Yeah,
producing the document if someone else were to ask for it on a later date. So they also try to help you with the language. It's how you ask. It's within the scope. All these things. There's a chemistry to how to get them to do what they have to do. And here's the thing: is I'm not just a member of the public asking for this. I'm a private investigating firm asking this. So that has a little bit of a weight to it, because
yes.
it's like there's some legal implication here if I do not provide.
Mm,
So, and I do believe that they won't release information unless they want to, but because they redact it, it makes it hard. But putting the pieces together is where we'll start to get these answers. That's why I created this system, so that way I can do what I want to do and be known for it, at least. Because like a lot of us do this stuff on our own, and it's really hard to get recognized for the work that you're doing. But at least I can do it, put it out there, and then one day someone like yourself will see it and be like, this is good, let's talk about it. and
mm,
and, and, and the goal is to make it helpful and useful, and to regulate everything and remove the fluff, so we have a true reading and understanding of what it
yeah,
is.
you're creating a great resource here for
Thank you.
investigators, a great one.
The so the association parts with along with the timeline also helps in stacking the evidence. So if you were to look at the timeline and you look at the declassified documents back in, I think it's 52s where those ones kind of routed, but then as I input paranormal beings or aerial activity from witness reports or other declassified documents, and then you see the timeline and you can start to actually see, like, you know what, this isn't a significant document, but this other significant document, which I found 5 years later, actually happened 2 days ago, 2 days after this one. That's interesting. So you're
Yeah.
taking you're taking this document, and yeah, a journalist will post it, and they'll get clickbait, and people will read it, won't understand what it means, and won't understand how to use the information. But by putting it on the map where the event happened, we get an understanding of the location of the base in which they're talking about everything. And then you have civilian reports close by. Well, there's a weird coincidence. You put it in time when you see when it happened, and then you see other experiencer reports who report today about a report back in 1952. And then all of a sudden that thing looks like what they're explaining. So we're putting all the pieces together in time and proximity. And then my crazy board, which is that association chart, who are the suspects, being seeing that a lot of these individuals have passed or moved on. I happen to be an expert in locating people, and the best way to locate a person from the past is to find the closest person to in the future. So you find their kids, talk to them, send a message to grandpa. Does he want to talk? So in order to do things like that, I need to have the right data. And when I have the
Well,
right data, yep, go ahead.
you know what I found an invaluable tool that's not one that jumps to mind in those cases when I was
Mm-hmm.
trying to track down family another generation is if you're in Canada and if you lived in a city, there used to be something called Mite City Directory.
Mm-hmm.
And it was like the phone book, but it was so much more than the phone book, Ryan, right? And for example, I used it just for an example on Shag Harbor because I could go through that when I had a name or a purported name of a diver. And I went to that year, and you could go up and down the street. You could go by name, you could go by whatever data you had. You find the individual, and it would actually tell you the family members who worked
Mm-hmm.
where, their ages, whatever. And I often track people down through that from
Yeah.
looking for somebody who died in 1970 or 60, or I found the jobs my grandmother had in 1895, that kind of thing.
But yeah,
But it's helped. And
oh
most
yeah.
libraries, if you're in Halifax or Toronto or Vancouver or Edmonton, they're going to have these books for that city, and they're usually in
Mm-hmm.
the reference section of the library. And if you're not in that city, you can call there and have them look that up, and when they give you that data, say okay, and then have them look up the next name. And it's a great resource before the net, and stuff that will never be digitized.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And it you can still do that now. It's called, I think it's InfoTracer is one of the main ones that kind of does the same thing. It's just digitized now. You have to pay for it in subscription. Sometimes you have to provide a license for that. But I mean, I never use that index, but it's the same. It's the same idea,
Mm.
right? So it's
Mm.
following those leads, talking to the people, and doing that. So what I'm hoping to do with this database by showing the work, it just makes it easier for me to do the work in the field because there's field work too. But I need to have access to my work at all times. So I'm doing it in such a way that people get to see what I do. So I'm showing my work,
Hmm.
and at the same time helping others, not just myself, and trying to encourage people like yourself, like to use it or to talk about it. Or that's how I'm learning whether or not it's my ideas are these ideas, because I'm I'm not an academic. I didn't go to university. I don't, I am not a
Neither am I.
scientist. Okay,
No.
but this, I understand what the scientists need, and I understand why the scientists are frustrated.
Yeah.
A good parallel that I use, or anecdote that I use, is like a crime scene. Okay,
Hmm.
so being an investigator or security guard, sometimes we are contracted to watch crime scenes. But even as a police officer, so just to move up in the way that it normally is done is through police work. The police officer isn't a scientist. The police officer is the initial person that shows up to the scene, collects all the facts, collects all the statements,
Hmm.
but has to be knowledgeable enough to know what types of evidence exist, and how and where those evidence could be found and located. And then we get into a point where there's blood splatter, blood pooling, whatever you see here. That's now, in order to, we know that that's evidence, so we secure that. We make sure no one touches that so it doesn't get tampered. But we don't draw samples from it because we're not scientists. But we're smart enough to know that we need the scientist, which is the CSI unit, to come in, extract
Mm-hmm.
that properly, test it,
Mm-hmm.
then tell me what that is, and then I can build my case around that. So using that same method or same philosophy, that's what I'm trying to do with this system, is create better data so the scientists can come over and pluck and
Exactly.
give and provide expert opinion on regulated data. Without opinion, using a universal system that allows all types of belief systems and interpretations and understanding, because the effort is there. And that's where the challenge is everyone's putting in separate efforts, not together, but that they talk about unity, and the unity comes in that social media game where they need likes and followers and monetization. Like, I understand that TESA is a media company. That's what I had to learn, how to do that, all these things, so I can share that
Mm.
and do all these things and have these opportunities. But that wasn't shown to me because it's very competitive. A lot of people want to keep their ideas for their books and sell their books, but putting it in a book, no offense to those who do that, as far as an evidence point of view, a lot, like 90% of it is opinionated evidence. So when I buy a book, I'm looking through it and be like, okay, this is the fact, this is the case you're talking about. Here's the document. Then I put the document on the website, and then maybe I'll link to the book that I got the document from. But the only thing that's
No.
important in terms of evidence, you know,
You know
sorry, go
why
ahead.
you're so good to be at the head of this, why this suits you so well, is the fact that you're not an academic or a scientist. The, and here's the advantage. That's not just a platitude, or I'm trying to give you a belly rub. It's this. It's that you will never have tunnel vision. Like you say, you understand the importance of all these categories, right? You
Mm-hmm.
understand the bar's got to be met. It's like when someone says to me, well, you should have a scientist look at it. Good, I'll hire one. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When I need one, I'll need whatever. Like, I recognize the need. I try to the scientific method and others and police techniques, etc., where
Mm-hmm.
appropriate. But the thing is, you will never suffer from that. It's that old thing. A person has an illness and it's mysterious. You send them to a psychiatrist, they'll write a script. You send them to a surgeon, they'll find something to cut. You will never.
You still have a variance of what type of psychiatrist that is, what type of doctor that is, and they might be skewed based on all these other things too. So
Sure.
even though the experts do their job, you might have a bad expert. Expert testimony is subject to the person who the judge is,
Hmm.
and in this situation, the experiencers are the judge. I'm an expert at nothing. Like, I'm a jack of all trades, sure, but expert in none.
Well,
I'm tunnel vision. I wouldn't say would never have it. There are times where I've gone over the line, but I have to dial myself back when I use these modalities to be like, it could be possible, might not be possible. So what do they have in common? So here's a good example. Like the individuals in the flat Earth community. Okay, their theory and opinions on that, as far-fetched as it may be, or could very well be real, who knows? I'm not an astronaut. I can't go to space to confirm or deny. And there is science that suggests it, and but it's all theory. It's all this, and these scientists haven't gone to space, but they're working with numbers and magic and all these things as they were told, and we have to trust the government. And if you trust the government, then the math is and the science is right. But if you don't trust the government and you're in all these fields, then you start to question and do all these other things. So it's both possible to be these things and not. But where it makes, what's interesting that I find with that community and compare that to the UFO community is the UFO community, sometimes there are some people that get mad at the paranormal people because the
sure.
ghosts
Yeah.
can't be real. But ghost, if you apply ghost
Mm.
to technology, like hologram technology or consciousness connection, then that evidence still, or mental telepathy, that still works in the UFO category. And
Hmm.
paranormal simply means not normal. So by definition, paranormal is UFOs, and UFOs is the study. Ufology is the study of things we can't find.
Yeah.
You
You
know,
know what? I'm so surprised, Ryan, too, that ufology hasn't learned that lesson. I agree with you. Because, even if you go back to a historic moment like the Condon Committee, they
yeah.
were forced to downgrade their definition of what they were using as a UFO. And in the end, it had
Hmm.
actually unraveled and got shortened to the point where they simply had to use something that was any observation that's puzzling to the observer. Now, think about how open and, you know, almost
They went
sad.
into that with, they were already briefed on what result they had to give, so they were working within the constructs of
Oh,
their
yes.
task.
Yeah.
So, and that's why measuring everything separately is important, and putting it all together regulated to get
Mhm.
a true index, a true reading of what the phenomenon is or may not be. And with the flat earth movement, they get attacked just as much as the paranormal side because of their opinions and theories and ideas, but the work effort that's put into both these communities, if that's measured, it's the same. Or if not, sometimes I've seen
Mhm.
those who believe in the flat earth model, uh, very smart, very intelligent theories, and very good high work in order to prove that the moon landing was a hoax. And because the moon
Mhm.
landing was a hoax, according to them, that means that the world must be flat. Now, that doesn't mean that, that's associating evidence, but
Mhm.
that is beneficial information for a ufologist, because some ufologists believe that NASA cuts the feed, and that the moon landing will be fake. So they have a common interest. So if they've just learned to work together and understand where their niches are, aces in places, and allow a difference of an opinion, but try to regulate that to figure out what they have in common, then you have more people focused on the truth. So it's not easy for me to mediate these groups and put these groups together. We will never have the flat earth movement and the ufology community together in
No.
the same room.
No.
That will never happen. Sometimes you might have paranormal people in a UFO conference, but you, because like that's with my experience. Whenever I talk paranormal at a UFO conference, they didn't like that. But if I talk UFOs at a paranormal conference, they loved it.
Mm.
So what's common is these people and these perceptions and all these other things. So all
Mm.
I do is with this system is I understand how to talk to these groups to break down what they're saying, to get the evidence that I need for the investigation to build the case to solve the mystery. And with doing this, there are still things that cannot be explained, whether I'm a scientist, an engineer, an anthropologist, all these other things. The way they look aren't normal. And association of facts, I have a variance of people, witnesses, that I know with my sample that are from different places of the world, spread across Canada, describing certain things and seeing things that cannot be explained or haven't been explained by common science. But that doesn't mean, that's where we get into that unidentified classification. Just because I've
Yeah.
unidentified it doesn't mean it can't be identified.
Yeah.
It
You
just
know,
means I don't know what it is.
I don't know why people get so upset. To me, I embrace the uncertainty. I think that's the beauty of it, of the unknown, you know? I mean,
Well, even if you think you know what it is, everything should be identified. You could say it's a drone. Perfect. How do you know
mm,
that? What supporting
mm,
evidence do you have to say that it's a drone? And if you can't confirm that it's a drone with a piece of evidence that takes a picture of the drone that shows that it's unadmissible in court. It's not good evidence to use. So it's either a drone or not a drone. It's still unidentified.
well,
And
yeah.
so from an evidence point of view, no one, there's too much of this feeling, emotion, need for money, need for fame, um, belief system, uninterpretation. There's so much stuff in the mid, but
Mm,
when I in the mud. But when I narrow it down and put the pieces together, it's easy and it makes sense. And the connection that I'm finding is that it's us, that perhaps maybe we are the beings, and perhaps we have the ability to activate these psychogenic philosophies, and we're spending more time focusing out than we are inner. And what I mean by that is, if we take the poltergeist phenomenon, we are told and raised that those are ghosts that have passed on that are moving the objects. But when But there are some people that have psychic abilities and they don't know that. And then what's common when I talk to these people that are expressing signs of poltergeist activity, they're all stressed that day. They're all certain ages. They all share certain blood types. They all have different things. They possess characteristics that are similar as a human being, but these types, experience the poltergeist phenomenon. And then I asked the question, like, what, maybe you moved it and you just believe that it was ghosts because that's what you were told. And once I change that and redirect that, then these people start to work on these abilities internally, because we can test that. We can test ourselves. And then the poltergeist activity happens again, and you know that you moved it because you tried. And that's why we measure the uninvited and the invited. Because if it's uninvited poltergeist activity, could turn into invited poltergeist activity if your thought process changed. And so we kind of have to not just regulate the data, I have to rewire the way that people are associating the facts. So we're in this common ground. So that way, when you get a verdict, when somebody goes to jail for something, we all the jury has to agree that they're going to jail based on the same facts and evidence. And who's the jury in this? That's the internet, is and depending on what sample you have in this court system, but we don't have a judge either. So just to give you a better understanding of how I'm approaching this, is I'm looking at this as an act of crime. So I'm able to determine who is responsible, and what organizations are behind it, which will kind of help understand where to focus when you're driving for disclosure and trying to get answers and all these other things to prove that there is a result to this. So if it is government related, then I'll be able to suggest that and heavily suggest that, and then imply that, whatever it is you're doing, if you are secretly testing these things, you are creating this environment where this group of people are suffering from anxiety, PTSD, depression, suicide, because they don't have answers. So whatever you're doing, is causing this to happen. So you don't have to tell us what is happening. Just be aware that it's affecting our people. And to help me regulate whether or not these people are telling the truth or not, would you consider providing mental health resources to practitioners that will adopt and accept the possibility that this phenomenon exists? And if I can get them to say that, that's kind of confirmation, because this stuff is happening and it affects our people. And that's why I created the experiential support. That's why the regulated data is important. And that's why you go for tests when you go to a doctor to see what's really wrong with you as an individual before they prescribe you with medicine. And then if that medicine doesn't work, it's all about us. And so this phenomenon is connected through us. We have hive consciousness. There's evidence to suggest that we're all communicating to ourselves. Another thing with the psychic phenomenon is when you meditate, and I'm putting out good into the world, and someone else is meditating, asking for, or praying, because that's a sign of meditation, asking God, for something. How do we know that when that person praying isn't picking up the love and light that the other person meditating is giving out? And if I put the arrow or point the finger more at as us as beings, there's more evidence to suggest that we are powerful, and we are responsible, and we are able of seeing in this interdimension. This ultra spectrum is what we call that, and that can be studied. And that's my observation, is that a lot of people are focusing outward, not focusing inward. And if you focus inward and realize that we are super beings,
I certainly know in the UFO field that you need two things to have a UFO sighting, encounter, event, whatever. Is you need a UFO, but you need a witness. You need a person. You need a human being to perceive and react to it, and to
depending
process it.
on what the results you want.
That's right.
An
But it's the same.
experiencer doesn't need that.
No, it's the same though in the other paranormal things. I mean, I think about even a miraculous event like Fatima, for example, where you had thousands of people there, and this was anticipated, and they're there. And I think the neatest thing, the most telling thing about an event like that, is the fact that after that miracle, as it's been referred to, but on the ninth day of the visitation, is that those who had the experience the dividing line wasn't between the faithful and unfaithful, wasn't between believers and non-believers. It ran by some factor that we don't know. Some
Mhm.
of the people, some of the communist soldiers there who, were not religious, witnessed this and fell and converted. Others, many of the faithful, saw nothing, etc. This is that complexity. This is the miracle of it, and whether it's a UF thing, a miraculous thing, poltergeist, or whatever, you have that human element. And like you say, man, you've taken on so much here to
Well, it's
turn this into useful data.
I
Man, you're on
appreciate
a
that.
quest. It's huge.
Well, I'm on a mission, that's for sure. I don't know why, but I'm just
And the,
feel like
and the
I'm.
reason I bring that up now at some point, and I'm glad I haven't heard the music yet, but we've got a temporal constraint here today. So listen, can we have you back to go at some time? I'm hoping,
Yeah,
like,
anytime.
because we're just
Yeah,
scratching the surface.
anytime.
I looked at your site, and right now I'm sitting on half a dozen questions as you
Yeah.
explain what you're. Well, there it is. I may have jinxed it here, but I think he let us go a little over the hour there, Mr. Music Ryan. But this is fascinating.
Okay.
Look, why don't you tell them what's the site that anybody can find on, whether you're a researcher, experiencer, person of interest. Where can they find all this online?
Yeah, so www.experiencersupport.org. You
Yeah.
find it there. Everything you need is there. There's programs. There's different ways that we put out the information. I do a show called Uncharted Case Files every Monday where I read the documents and I explain to you how it's important. I'm actually explaining the ultraspectrum classification system this Monday.
Yeah.
And I do a podcast, Beyond the Tinfoil Hat, where I actually interview people dry off the cuff, as if I know nothing, and I kind of show my interrogation skills a little bit in such
Well,
a
you're
way to
not
get it.
you're not shy to take the challenge of the bit, are you? To you know,
No one's helping me, sir. I
yeah,
had to work
yeah.
so hard to get here because they all want to do their own thing. And I get it. I understand that. And I can't make them play with me. But I do believe that if I connect the dots, it'll be a lot easier for everybody. So I appreciate you for acknowledging that, giving me the
No, it
opportunity
sounds a
to
lot,
do
lot
that.
of work. I encourage
Uh,
you to keep it up.
and as
Yes,
individuals
and
like yourself who pioneered this, Shag Harbor, you're famous for that. I mean, I've researched Shag Harbor too, and I mean, I would love to get documents from you to add to the database.
I don't like to tease. We're going to talk some more offline, like down the road. I'll be sending some things to
Okay.
you. I've got something coming down the road. I actually hope is going to eclipse Shag Harbor for impact, and that will be coming out later this year. And I'll
Perfect.
let you know something of it beforehand. And
Okay.
I hate to do that and tease, but I got to at this point because it's just such an active investigation, manuscript, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, thank you for giving us an hour, and thank you, Rogers, for getting your act back together for us so we can be here today. We will have you back, Ryan.
Thank you.
Stick around, by the way.